The town of Passaic, New Jersey is on the road to recovery tonight as it tries to heal wounds of grief caused by the brutal murder of a young girl. Channel 2's Lisa Castleman joins us now with the story. Lisa.
Reggie, it happens now all too often that a crime is so brutal, so devastating, that an entire community suffers.
I don't want to remember this too much.
You don't want to remember it?
It's too sad. It's too sad.
At first glance, it may seem like things are back to normal in this suburban area of Passaic, but take a closer look and listen to people here, and you'll see that there's still a lot of pain since 9-year-old Divina Genao was murdered on May 5th. Police say 40-year-old Conrad Jeffrey lured the girl away as she played with other children outside her home, then took her up to his apartment in a nearby rooming house where he sexually assaulted, beat, and strangled her. Just like an individual, an entire community can feel traumatized in the aftermath of a disaster or an especially gruesome crime like the murder of Divina Genao. Even the caregivers themselves, people like teachers or social workers, can be affected by a sense of shock. New Jersey's Chief Justice Robert Willens has ordered an investigation into this case on how the criminal courts let Conrad Jeffrey avoid tougher prosecution. And I understand late today the governor is also asking for an investigation.
Everyone in New Jersey is asking that question, I believe.
They don't want this to ever happen again.
Police in New Jersey are looking for the killer of a 6-year-old girl, a child who vanished on a tragic trip to her aunt's house. Latasha Goodman was playing in her aunt's Asbury Park backyard when she was lured away by a stranger offering money. The girl's body was found partially clothed 4 hours later. Investigators say it appears she was sexually assaulted.
In May of 1993, a 6-year-old by the name of Divina Genao was lured away from her home by a stranger. The stranger made promises of giving her money if she won a race. Her unsuspecting mother was at home in her room, thinking that her children were in the next room playing. Divina's sister, who was only 9 years old at the time, is who had the idea to sneak out and play, completely unaware of the dangers that lurked outside. Now, Divina's story is one a lot of you guys might be familiar with if you followed my coverage of her a few months ago. If not, I'll leave the link in the description. Now, when this first happened to Divina, her family wanted to make sure that everybody knew about it because they needed people to know about the atrocities that were really going on in the streets and how children were falling victims to these monsters. But the very little coverage that Divina received after she was taken is where the problem lies, because her family felt like everybody just sort of forgot about what happened. Divina's family wanted people to know about what happened so that families could protect their children from it happening again, but nothing was ever done. Now imagine the horror on residents of New Jersey's minds when the exact same thing would happen to yet another child just 2 months later. Now, before jumping into this story, I have to warn that the details are very hard to get through. Viewer discretion is advised. On today's episode of Evil Intentions, this is 208 Elizabeth Ave, the story of Latasha Goodman. 6-year-old Latasha was described as a very sweet and loving little girl who loved to laugh, a child who blessed everyone she met throughout her short life. According to sources, she was the middle child out of 3 sisters. Latasha attended the Red Bank Primary School in New Jersey. While attending the school, she would make many friends who all got along with her. Like a lot of typical 6-year-olds, she was full of life. She was full of energy, and she brought that energy wherever she went. Whether she was meeting someone new or connecting with someone in her family or a friend, she was always a happy and innocent child who left her positive impression on many. Latasha was described by her mother as friendly and outgoing. She loved Barney the dinosaur, playing hopscotch outside with her sisters, and playing with some of her favorite dolls. Of course, with siblings, there will always be innocent rivalries, but Latasha loved her sisters, and she looked up to her eldest sister, and her sisters showed her the same affection. Aside from making friends at school and spending time with her siblings, she also had friends at church. Latasha and her family would often attend church at the Shrewsbury Avenue AME Zion Church in Red Bank. Latasha sang in the Cherubs choir, and she loved it. While singing in the choir, Latasha sang with so much heart that whenever Sunday service came, the Reverend would look for little Latasha because he knew there was just so much passion in her singing, even at the tender age of just 6 years old. Reverend Andrew Foster, someone who little Latasha will refer to as her buddy, recalled Latasha's time attending the church as nothing but pleasant and had many fond memories of her. Foster talked about having a going away party planned, and when he told little Latasha that she could attend, she would react with excitement and a huge smile, full of innocence and love. On a different occasion, she would be asked what she wanted for Christmas coming later in the year. Latasha's response? Ice cream. There was even a time when Foster started a sermon by asking the audience, "Is everyone happy?" From behind him, he could hear little Latasha's voice yell, "Yes." Her enthusiasm and loving energy was always more than welcomed. Reverend Foster was quoted as saying, "When Tasha got a hold of you, you would melt like butter. She was so sweet and so loving." Latasha was very loved and adored by anyone and everyone she came into contact with. They couldn't get enough of her big smile and big personality. But their days with Latasha were numbered, because on July 18th of 1993, she would cross paths with pure evil. According to reports, on this day, Latasha's mother took her children over to her sister's house in Asbury Park, about 20 to 30 minutes away. When they arrived at their aunt's home, the children got situated, and shortly after, they went to the backyard to play. On this day with the family, like many others, Latasha's aunt went to the store, leaving her sister, Latasha's mother, in the home with the children. A perfectly normal store run, something people do every day. But as she returned from the store and got closer to home, she saw her daughter and son coming down the street, and Latasha's mother was standing on the porch. She couldn't predict what she would soon learn, but she immediately knew that something was wrong. Before she made it back home, during the short time she was gone, Latasha's mother and her youngest daughter were on the front porch of the home, while Latasha, her other sister, and their cousin were in the backyard playing house. What was thought to be a safe place for the kids to play was invaded by someone with sickening motives. The children were approached by a stranger who made offers. He offered money, candy, and ice cream to the kids in an attempt to get them to leave the backyard with him. Latasha's cousin and sister stood back, but little Latasha, unaware of the danger that she was truly in, with her trusting and loving personality, accepted the stranger's offer. The man would reach over the fence into the backyard to get Latasha, who went with him. Her sister warned her and told her not to leave, but before she knew it, Latasha was in the stranger's arms, and the children watched as they walked off. The children who had witnessed Latasha leave with this man and many others in the neighborhood would immediately begin searching for little Latasha. They all called Latasha's name as loud as they could, from corner to corner on every block in the area, hoping to hear the young child answer them back. But the harder they searched, the more frantic they'd become, knowing that every second counted, and the more they searched, the more they'd turn up with nothing. As they continued to search, they'd hear from people in the area about an abandoned house nearby where 2 people were seen. It wasn't much to go on, but they made sure to check. They went to 208 Elizabeth Avenue. One of Latasha's cousins, the son of her aunt, tried to look under the porch. He saw an open space and looked through, but couldn't see anything. He tried to remove one of the wooden boards that covered the porch, but he wasn't able to. Police had already been called and were also searching the area, hoping to find little Latasha safely. They were actively searching the area since around 6:30 p.m. that day, with no trace of her. But that would all change at around 7:50 p.m. According to testimony, after conducting an extensive search of the area where Latasha was last seen, Patrolman Sean Ryan would set his sights on 208 Elizabeth Avenue, the same location Latasha's cousin found himself investigating earlier. The home was obviously abandoned. Plywood covered the front door and all of the windows on the first floor. Nothing seemed to stand out, but again, talks about people being seen at this home were brought up. After speaking to a few more people, Officer Ryan went back to the location, and he checked on the porch. It was boarded up as mentioned earlier, but he saw a crack in the plywood and used his flashlight to see what was beyond his reach. He looked as close as he could, and what he saw was a small foot. He tried to remove the wood but needed help from another officer. The plywood was jammed under a nail in a support beam. After successfully removing the board, he immediately rushed under, crawling his way toward the foot and radioing for first aid. The area was littered with paper bags, beer bottles, and other debris. There was also a mattress under the porch. and on top of it was little Latasha's body. Her shirt was pulled up above her head, and her underwear was pulled down to her ankles. A portion of her body that was exposed was found to be covered in blood. Shocked and sickened by the finding, Officer Ryan tried to find the child's pulse while also checking her body temperature. There was no pulse, no breathing, and her body was freezing cold. It was a warm spring day. Officer Ryan was sure from this alone that little Latasha was gone. A firefighter arrived at the scene shortly after and confirmed everyone's worst fears. Latasha was dead. They checked the location carefully for anything that could help them find who did this. That's when they found a gym bag amongst the mess under the porch. Inside of the bag were belongings that would help lead authorities to a homeless man named David Cooper. Cooper was no stranger to crime, with a record for many offenses including attempt to violate women, assault, and for drug possession. Police would catch up to him, and he was brought into custody on July 20th of 1993.
Police in New Jersey are looking for the killer of a 6-year-old girl, a child who vanished on a tragic trip to her aunt's house. Latasha Goodman was playing in her aunt's Asbury Park backyard when she was lured away by a stranger offering money. The girl's body was found partially clothed 4 hours later. Investigators say it appears she was sexually assaulted. While New Yorkers examine the problems uncovered in the Crown Heights report, New Jersey is also asking what went wrong. In recent months, children have lost their lives, and the blame could go to a justice system that allows hardened criminals to fall through the cracks and return to the streets. Celeste Ford reports.
Their grief is subsiding. Now the family of Latasha Goodman seethes with anger. The 6-year-old was brutally raped and murdered in Asbury Park on Sunday. Police say 22-year-old David Cooper did it. They arrested the ex-convict yesterday.
I will be relieved when I find out what the judge wishes to give him as a sentence. And in my opinion, I feel he should get the death penalty. New Jersey has it, they should use it.
The scenario bears an alarming resemblance to the case of Conrad Jeffrey. He was arrested in the murder of a 7-year-old Patterson girl 2 months ago. Both Jeffrey and Cooper allegedly lured the girls with money, then abducted, raped, and strangled them. Jeffrey was paroled into an unsuspecting community despite a long criminal record. It includes a murder charge that was dropped when he was found mentally unfit to stand trial. Cooper was released after serving time for a drug conviction. He also has a criminal record, and according to one report, Cooper was arrested for criminal sexual contact, but the case was never resolved. In each case, the suspects were free less than 6 weeks before they were arrested again. The State Parole Board admits in the Jeffrey case it failed to thoroughly review the prisoner's record before granting him parole, and the incident led to stricter guidelines. But in this case involving Cooper, the state insists authorities fulfilled all their obligations.
The inmate who we're referring to, Mr. David Cooper, maxed out on his sentence. Therefore, the parole board had nothing to do with him getting out. He got out, and he had no supervision whatsoever when he was out there. And that's not our doing or anybody else's doing, that's the law.
But residents say they need to know who's moving into their neighborhood.
But sometimes you think that the community is safe and you don't let your children know, and you just send your children out there to play and you think they're safe and they're not.
They consider it a breakdown in the system, and this time Latasha Goodman paid. In Asbury Park, Celeste Ford, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
The Asbury Park suspect David Cooper is being held on $750,000 bail.
When Cooper was apprehended, there was a sense of relief thanks to the monster being captured, but also a sense of failure, because this should not have happened again, especially so soon after recent events. Cooper would confess to his crime. He gave details on how he was drunk and gained the child's trust before he took her under the porch at the abandoned home, where he proceeded to violate her. Latasha sustained critical injuries to her private areas during the savage attack, but a medical examiner concluded that the cause of death was her being strangled for 4 to 6 minutes, something Cooper said was an accident during his confession. But during testimony, it was stated that Cooper wore a condom during his attack, hoping to not leave any DNA evidence behind. After the attack, he simply walked off and boarded up the area. Worst of all, he also said that while he violated and took Latasha's life, he could hear the children and residents in the area calling Latasha's name as they looked for her. They had no idea how close she really was. After the sadness and immense grief subsided in the neighborhood, children were left feeling frightened, while others were now becoming angry. Why was someone with a history like this allowed to roam the streets? These were the same questions that people had just 2 months prior when Conrad Jeffrey was left free to roam the streets. And then he crossed paths with little 6-year-old Divina Genao. He too earned the innocent child's trust before cruelly violating her and ending her life. Everyone was shocked and hurt. They were angry that this was even possible back then. And here were New Jersey residents, yet again, with that dreadful feeling. The comparisons between Latasha Goodman and Divina Genao were made almost instantly. Both men and both slayings lured the girls with money. They were both abducted, violated, and had the life violently squeezed out of them in savage attacks. Both of the monsters in the attacks were free less than 6 weeks before they committed these heinous acts. They were both released to unsuspecting communities, and they had no business being in those areas, especially when they had a history of violence. In Jeffrey's case, he was even wanted for murder and left to roam free, as residents continued to ask why this was even allowed, and why they were never informed of someone like this being so close. But they weren't getting any answers. When Divina Genao was taken from her family, they expressed how they felt it wasn't getting much attention. They wanted people to know about this, to raise awareness, to sound the alarm, and let everyone know about the dangers that lurked at home. The police response was exactly what it should have been. There was never any question when it came to that, but the response after was just as important. Was there anything being done to prevent this from happening again? How could this have happened again when it already happened once, almost exactly the same way? There were no answers to those questions either. After Divina was taken, her name disappeared from the headlines. She would only be referenced in a news broadcast 2 months later, when Latasha's life was taken the exact same way. After Latasha's life was taken, it was as if everything just kept on going. The family and people close to Latasha would get the sense that nobody shared their pain or knew how they felt. Latasha's name also disappeared from the headlines, and just like that, another child was viciously slain, and there was no assurance that anything was being done to stop it from happening again. Life just seemed to move on. After the deaths of Divina and Latasha, a few months down the line, nobody talked about it anymore. The only times these names would get attention on a large scale again would be at David Cooper's trial. Cooper's lawyers tried to paint a picture of Cooper having a chaotic childhood. It was said that since he was a young boy, he was fed alcohol and suffered extreme neglect and abuse. For about a week straight, the defense brought forth everyone from Cooper's social worker to his alcoholism counselor to a psychologist, who all came to his defense. They stated all those factors played a role in his heinous act. As if this wasn't insulting enough, a judge decided that impact statements from Latasha's family would not be allowed. This meant that her family couldn't express their anger, their pain, or their anguish. The devastating impact that her death had on the community wouldn't even be addressed. It was as if their feelings didn't even matter. Cooper's defense would argue that this death was accidental, saying he leaned on her neck as he violated her, but Latasha had bruises on both sides of her neck. It was clear to prosecutors that this was no accident. Everything he did was carefully carried out, and he almost got away with it. If not for someone seeing people at that location, who knows how long it would have taken before they even looked there. Assistant prosecutor Elaine Lachelle would make a suggestion to the jury. She would ask them to all hold hands and squeeze for at least 3 minutes. A medical examiner confirmed it would have taken 4 to 6 minutes, but her goal was to show the jury that this took effort. It was no accident. After a grueling trial, Cooper was sentenced to death for what he did to Latasha Goodman. Latasha's sister was a star witness. She helped put him in prison after bravely pointing Cooper out in court, recalling how Cooper took her sister. He sat on death row for years as he appealed that decision. In 2007, the death penalty was abolished altogether in New Jersey, so his sentencing was changed to life in prison. He still sits in prison today. A service was held for little Latasha on July 23rd of 1993 at the AME Zion Church in Red Bank, where she attended. The service was filled with beautiful memories of little Latasha, but the intense grief everyone felt was hard to ignore. Latasha's uncle carried the small coffin out of the church. Surprising to see a coffin so small, knowing the victim had their whole lives ahead of them. In 1995, at the Red Bank school Latasha attended, her friends and former classmates would plant a memorial tree in memory of Latasha. They stood around the tree and bowed their heads in her memory. They too had to cope with the heavy loss of their young friend. Some were just far too young to understand. When a monster commits a horrifying act like this, it affects these families in ways we can't even imagine. The grief extends to friends, family, the teachers, classmates, the people who'd grown used to seeing these children, never thinking that something so horrible would ever happen to them. For those who knew these young victims, the scars are still fresh. Please keep that in mind when sharing how you feel about today's case. Many still bear those memories. You look at the news today and you hear about horror stories just like this, even all these years later. These families were never given a chance to truly tell a jury how much this affected them and what this did to this community. I hope they're at peace. My heart goes out to them. While blame was sometimes shifted and the accountability was never fully taken when it came to why these two monsters were out free, family and friends were at least happy that justice on some level had been served. But the question still remained. How long before this would happen again? Rest in peace, Latasha Goodman, and my deepest condolences go out to her family and her loved ones. You aren't forgotten.